story of Ivonne Baldelli, a tragic love story set on a paradise island. Sometimes, the pursuit of an earthly utopia can lead straight into an inescapable nightmare. Yet, a crucial element in this journey is the choice of a companion. Selecting who to share this pursuit with requires the greatest care, as even those we hold closest can sometimes transform into ruthless tormentors. The relationship between Ivonne Baldelli and Brian Brimager initially seemed like a fairy tale. Ivonne believed she had found her soulmate and was willing to follow him anywhere. However, her family harbored reservations about Brian from the outset, sensing something amiss. Sadly, their intuition proved to be well-founded. This tragic tale began in 2011, when Ivonne, seemingly blissful and in love, left with Brian for a tropical island. Unbeknownst to her, she was walking toward her own doom. Years later, her dismembered remains, along with those of her beloved pets, were discovered in a swamp, concealed in bags. Her family fought tirelessly for justice, a struggle that claimed the life of another family member. Who was Ivonne Baldelli? Born Ivonne Olivia Baldelli, née Fold, on June 30, 1969, she grew up in a small Southern Californian town, full of life and promise. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a particularly close bond from childhood. When Ivonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lillian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Ivonne received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Ivonne unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Ivonne lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost—
Guys, a married Marine with a kid, already cheating with 2 women, one of them pregnant? And Ivonne still thought she was the soulmate? This is textbook love bombing mixed with gaslighting. We've all seen it before, and it rarely ends well.
Almost daily and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Ivonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimager was not only seeing Ivonne, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr.'s administration. When Ivonne discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just 1, but 2 women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Ivonne, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, But Ivonne's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on the tropical island. Ivan shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Carnero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Ivan informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Ivonne sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill
the emails supposedly sent from Costa Rica, but the IP is in California, where Brian is. That's the moment the mask completely slips. He's not even trying to hide it anymore.
her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Ivonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Carnero Island, where they rented a house right on the oceanfront. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Yvonne's business also developed very slowly with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister Michelle Valenzuela almost daily, sharing everything, but her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Ivan hoped that Brian would propose and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. The time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, Michelle stopped receiving messages from Yvonne, which raised her concerns significantly. Then on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the US and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Yvonne, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along and who was pregnant.
Daily screaming fights, bruises she hides with sunglasses, neighbors hearing everything. Classic domestic violence pattern. And no one on that tiny island did anything because they were just tourists. That one hurts.
With his child when he and Ivan flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Ivan couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Ivonne wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Ivonne was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous, but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Ivonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Yvonne would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Ivan had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Ivonne Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Yvonne's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return. They would get married and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation. 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winter, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Ivan being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winter decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Ivan's family members. Later, Ivan's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Caramaro, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of Baldelli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches too did not yield any success. The prime suspect—
Google search, how to clean blood from a mattress, the day after Thanksgiving. That single line on his laptop is one of the coldest pieces of digital evidence I've ever heard.
And the first solid evidence. From the outset, Ryan was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently recounting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012 that Brimager was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife, Christine, was at work while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Ivan had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Ivan's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Ivonne with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop search history from November 26, 2011 contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Ivonne didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winter discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence, proving Yvonne's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Carinaro, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the water's surface. Driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside, he looked in the bag only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Ivonne, although limbs were missing. Mythologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Ivonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Ivonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Ivonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using a machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Ivonne had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Yvonne's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what. Andrea Nabel, a 37-year-old single mother of 2, lived in Louisville, Kentucky. A graduate of the University of Louisville, she had been working as an analyst for Humana, an insurance company, but was laid off shortly before the summer of 2019. Adding to her struggles, her car was recently totaled in a hit-and-run accident. On the night of August 13, 2019, around 1 a.m., Andrea left her sister's home in Louisville's Audubon Park neighborhood after a family argument. Distressed, she made several phone calls between 1:30 and 2 a.m., attempting to arrange a ride. Shortly thereafter, she was seen walking along the 4,000 block of Finn Castle Road. Since that night, Andrea has neither been seen nor heard from, and her cell phone activity ceased entirely. Investigators discovered that several security cameras in the vicinity of her last known location were not functioning, complicating efforts to uncover what happened to her. Andrea's family has been dedicated to the search for her, putting up flyers and going door to door looking for potential witnesses. In addition to her family's efforts, a massive volunteer effort has been made in Andrea's case, in part due to her own efforts to help locate missing individuals. Andrea was a member of Missing in America, an organization of volunteers that helps look for individuals who have gone missing. She was an active participant in a search in Ohio just 5 months before she herself went missing. According to Nancy Schaefer-Smith, the founder of Missing in America, Andrea is the first member of the organization to go missing. Other volunteers from the group have traveled to Kentucky from all across the United States to help in the efforts to find Andrea. In addition to Andrea's fellow volunteers from Missing in America, volunteers from the Louisville community have also participated in several organized searches for her. There have been several reported sightings of her in the greater Louisville area that have caused the locations of these searches to shift. The most recent of these potential sightings, as of the making of this video, came on October 1st, 2019, when police in Clarksville, Indiana, just across the Ohio River from Louisville, announced that there had been an unconfirmed sighting of Andrea in their town. This sighting, along with all the other potential sightings of Andrea since August 13th, has not been confirmed. Due to Andrea's work with Missing in America, her family does not believe that she would willingly disappear. She was aware of how much heartache it would cause her loved ones and of how much effort volunteers would put into looking for her. Furthermore, they argue that she could not stand to be away from her sons for this length of time. The search effort for Andrea remains active, but her disappearance remains unsolved. Michael McLean grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, and graduated from Stamford High School in 2008. Around 2012, he moved to Manchester, New Hampshire to attend Hesser College. He graduated with a degree in criminal justice and decided to remain in New Hampshire. In 2019, the 29-year-old was living in Manchester and working for Easter Seals, a non-profit organization. On Saturday, April 20th, Michael went out to the Tropical Lounge, a nightclub in Nashua, New Hampshire, with 2 of his friends. In the early morning hours of April 21st, 2 women got into a verbal altercation inside of the club. The situation escalated after the 2 women went outside of the club at closing time. Michael stepped in to try to break up the altercation. Michael was not directly involved in the disagreement, but he had tried to break up a fight he witnessed at least once before. According to his family, this kind of behavior was very much in line with Michael's good-natured personality. Michael did appear to at least know one of the women involved in the altercation and had danced with her earlier in the evening. Due to the altercation, the police were called to the club's parking lot. When they arrived, the crowd scattered. At this point, Michael was separated from his friends. They looked for Michael for 45 minutes. Michael did not answer their phone calls, and his car was still parked on Orange Street, less than a mile from the club where he had left it earlier in the evening. Michael's friends then left to return to Manchester without him. Michael's best friend and roommate, Ben Harris, was not at the apartment he shared with Michael that weekend. He had gone to Boston to celebrate Easter with his family. He, therefore, was not there to notice that Michael never arrived home after his night out. He did notice when Michael never came home Sunday night. Michael's family took notice when he did not return phone calls from his mother and grandmother on Easter Sunday. His job took notice on Monday morning when the usually dependable Michael did not show up for work. He was reported missing to the police on Monday, April 22nd. There has been no activity on his social media or financial accounts since he went missing. According to police, Michael left the club at approximately 1:45 a.m. At 1:49 a.m., Mike placed a phone call to his boss, during which he told her, "They're after me more than one." It would not have been unusual for Michael to call his boss if he were in trouble. He had a good relationship with her and had called her before in situations where he needed a ride or was having trouble with his car. The call disconnected after 2 minutes. Michael's boss immediately tried calling him back, but Michael did not answer. She sent him texts at 154 and 218, but he did not respond to either of them. She made one more attempt to call him at 225, but he again did not answer the phone. While Michael was not replying to his boss, his phone was sending out texts during this time. He sent a series of texts to one of his neighbors, but not all of them make sense. Michael's father believes that it is possible that at least some of these texts were the result of the text-to-speech function on Michael's phone, meaning that Michael did not mean to send the texts, but his phone transcribed words or sounds it recorded him saying. Eldridge is the name of a small side street not far from the tropical lounge that Michael may have run down while trying to get away from the individuals who were chasing him. But by the time he sent the text referencing it, he would most likely not have been near that street because other evidence places him at a different location. The last text message Michael received on his phone came in at 2:27 a.m. and the phone was last pinged at 2:30 a.m. At this time, the phone was at a McDonald's on East Hollis Street, less than half a mile down the street from the Tropical Lounge. The police were able to confirm that Michael was actually at the restaurant through witness statements from McDonald's employees and an acquaintance of Michael's who saw him there. Police could not track Michael's movements using his phone past 2:30 a.m., most likely because his battery had died. Surveillance footage next shows Michael at a Speedway gas station further down East Hollis Street. Inside the gas station, Michael asked if he could use their phone. It is unclear if he actually made a call there. Michael's father went to speak with the employee who had been working at the gas station that night, but he was not able to follow basic conversation or provide coherent answers to questions. Mr. McLean believed the employee had some sort of substance abuse problem. The last known footage of Michael was taken at 3:30 a.m. The last known footage of Michael was taken at 3:30 a.m. Michael was picked up by multiple cameras at the residences at Riverfront Landing, a new condo complex on Bancroft Street, a side street off of East Hollis, further east from the Speedway and McDonald's. The last time Michael is seen on video, he was exiting the complex. Michael being there confirms that he was continuing to head east on Hollis Street. It is unclear why Michael went off the main road and into the condo complex. If he had stayed on Hollis, he would have had to go over a bridge, but the bridge did have a sidewalk and lighting, so he could have done so. Michael's father believes that his son may have walked into the complex to try to trick someone following him into thinking that he lived in the complex and was going inside his residence. The Nashua police claim that no one was following Michael that night, but his parents are not fully convinced of this. The fact that Michael told his boss that he was being chased right after leaving the club seems to indicate that he ran into trouble there. An ex-boyfriend of the woman Michael had been dancing with had reportedly been at the Tropical Lounge that night, providing a potential motive for someone to go after Michael. Given the fact that Michael was last seen on surveillance footage near a river, there is a possibility that he accidentally fell into the water, but this seems unlikely. There were multiple obstacles between where Michael was last seen and the river, including a dry well and a wooded area. Furthermore, Michael would have had to go up a grassy hill, slick from recent rain, in order to go towards the water. From there is a section of river rock and then a section of small boulders that Michael would have had to get over in order to get into the water. It is unclear exactly why Michael kept walking east on Hollis Street. Hollis is a main street and was relatively well lit. So if Michael was being followed, it would make sense for him to stay on that street. He may also have gone into the McDonald's because it was one of the few places in the neighborhood that was open 24 hours, and he felt safe waiting out the individuals who were following him there. It is unclear why he did not call his friends to come meet him and why he continued east when his phone died and he needed to make a call. My personal theory is that Michael mistakenly believed that he was walking back to his car, even though in reality he was walking away from it. To get from where Michael parked his car on Orange Street to the Tropical Lounge, he had to cross a bridge over the Nashua River. Michael was not familiar with Nashua and had not spent a lot of time there. I believe it is possible that Michael may have asked someone on the street or at the McDonald's or in the Speedway for directions on how to get to the bridge, not knowing that was more than one bridge nearby. This theoretical person may have told Michael to keep going east on Hollis, where there was another bridge going over the Merrimack River, assuming that this was the bridge Michael was asking about. It was near this bridge that Michael was last seen on surveillance footage. No one has ever come forward saying that they had such a conversation with Michael. This is purely a theory on my part. I believe it explains why Michael was not trying to get a hold of the friends he had been at the club with while he still had power on his phone. He believed that he was close to his vehicle, which meant that he believed he was close to safety and his means to get home. While this theory may explain some of Michael's behavior during the early morning hours of Easter Sunday, 2019, it does not explain what happened to him after he walked out of the condo complex on Bancroft Street. That mystery still remains despite the best efforts of Michael's dedicated family. 70-year-old Jean Johnson lived in a remote area of Capitan, New Mexico. The grandmother of two had moved there from Ruidoso, New Mexico, where the rest of her family lived, around the time her husband passed away. She wore some of her late husband's ashes around her neck in a clear pendant and still wore her wedding band in 2019, even though her husband had passed away almost 8 years prior. She resisted her daughter Heidi's attempts to get her to start dating again. Jean and Heidi were very close and normally spoke on the phone at least 3 times a day. On Sunday, May 26, 2019, Jean sent Heidi a picture of a dog she was taking care of for a friend. This will be the last communication Heidi received from her mother. Heidi had a busy workday on Monday 27th, so she did not get a chance to try to call her mother until the early evening. Jean did not answer. Heidi tried calling again on Tuesday, but Jean still did not pick up the phone, which was unusual. Heidi was becoming concerned, and these concerns were validated shortly after her Tuesday call to her mother when she received a phone call from the friend Jean had been dog-sitting for. Jean and her friend had planned for Jean to drop the dog off at the friend's house on Monday, the day they returned from their trip. Jean had not shown up to bring back the dog. Heidi drove half an hour to her mother's home. The gate at the beginning of the long driveway was locked, and Jean's car was in the driveway. Her cell phone and purse were locked inside of it. The one real sign of trouble was the fact that the front door of the house was slightly open. The dog Jean had been watching was still inside the house. It had several accidents in the house, indicating that it had not been let outside in some time. According to Heidi, Jean loved this dog and would not have left it on its own for such a long time willingly. Only one item in Jean's home seemed out of place. It was initially believed that Jean's .357 pistol was missing because it was not in her hope chest where it was normally kept. However, it was found inside of a pouch on top of a pile of laundry. Jean had packed up the laundry to take it to Heidi's house that week. According to Heidi, Jean did not use the pistol recreationally and only had it for protection. She would only have taken it out if she thought there was a mountain lion too close to her property or if someone had shown up at her house and she had reason to fear them. Police searched Jean's 10-acre property with the aid of helicopters, drones, and tracking dogs. They found nothing and had to expand their search area. Still, they found no sign of Jean. Heidi has organized several of her own searches with volunteers on ATVs and horseback covering large tracts of remote land. Desperate for any possible leads, Heidi has also consulted several psychics for help. They have all told her that her mother is no longer alive. Despite the lack of new information in her mother's case, Heidi continues her efforts to find her. Her next large-scale search for Jean is scheduled for October 26th. Kisara Stops Pretty Places, born on August 14, 2001, was a compassionate and vibrant young woman from Montana, with ties to the Crow and Northern Cheyenne nations. Known for her athleticism, Kisara excelled in basketball, football, cross-country running, and wrestling. During her teenage years at Hardin High School, she participated in plays, sang in the choir, and was admired for her kindness and love for animals, often caring for strays. Kisara dreamed of becoming a performer, pursuing acting and singing with determination, but her bright future was tragically cut short shortly after her 18th birthday. On August 24, 2019, Kisara was last seen in Hardin, a rural town near the Crow Reservation where she lived with her grandmother and legal guardian, Yolanda Frazier. Though it's unclear where Kisara was heading that day, she had planned to meet her mother the next day for a trip to North Dakota. When Kisara failed to show up and stopped responding to texts, calls, and social media, a significant red flag, her family grew increasingly concerned. That same day, Kisara's aunt, Priscilla Boltio, tried to report her missing to the Big Horn County Sheriff's Office. However, she was falsely told there was a mandatory waiting period before filing a report. Under Montana law, anyone under 21 is considered a minor, and an Amber Alert should have been issued immediately. Instead, it took until August 27th for her family to officially file a missing persons report. Authorities dismissed their concerns, claiming Kisara was likely with friends, despite her uncharacteristic silence. Following her disappearance, law enforcement's response was minimal. Reports indicate they did not actively search for Kisara, nor did they distribute flyers to help trace her last movements or encourage witnesses to come forward. Priscilla felt that Kisara's troubled past and history of running away led law enforcement to disregard her case. This lack of urgency and support left her family struggling to uncover the truth about what happened to Kisara. Although much of the 18-year-old's past remains a mystery to the public, it has been noted in recent articles that she had some issues with alcohol. In April of 2019, she was found unresponsive at school because she was heavily intoxicated, and she had to be rushed to the ER. Then on August 29th, a passing jogger discovered Kisara's body by a woodpile in the back garden of a home at the intersection of Mitchell Avenue and Rangeview Drive in the Hard in Suver, where she was last seen alive 5 days earlier. The homeowner was out of town when her body was found and had no connection to the teenager. Kisara's family were not notified immediately that a body had been found. Reports of a teenager's remains being discovered began circulating on social media, and the family caught wind of the rumors. They began to fear the worst. Vasilia went to the scene to ID the body, but was turned away without being able to view the remains, and the local media were not alerted to the fact that a body had been found. Quezra's mother, along with Yolanda, then went to the local mortuary so they could view the body on September 1st. But they were informed that the body didn't belong to the missing team, and so the family continued the search. It wasn't until 10 days later it was revealed that the body was in fact Caesar's. The coroner ruled that she had perished on August 26th and that her death was suspicious. Her remains were already badly decomposed, so the cause of death could not be determined. Asphyxiation could not be ruled out. Following this discovery, the teenager's family kept the pressure on law enforcement to investigate the death. On September 12th, Kisara's mother, Geraldine, was told by Terry Bullis, the county coroner and the owner of Bullis Mortuary, that her daughter's remains had to be cremated in order to be returned to the family, despite the fact this was against the family's cultural beliefs and would remove the possibility of further examinations of the body. Furthermore, the family had wanted the Dahl Funeral Home in Billings, Montana to handle funeral arrangements, but Bullis made them use his business and ordered Kisara's cremation before other family members arrived in Hardin. On September 14th, the family located the sites where Kisara's body was discovered with the help of relatives who lived nearby. They had attempted to visit the area a few days earlier, but were unable to because the scene was no longer sealed off, and there was no demarcation of where the body was found. At the scene, they performed a ritual ceremony and noted that the area was very visible and had high traffic. A neighbor, Jason Cummings, who had found the body, told the family that the police had removed Kisara's phone from her pocket and that he had told them to charge it so her family could be contacted, although they appeared to ignore this suggestion. He too had questioned why the crime scene hadn't been sanctioned off to prevent contamination. 5 days later, on September 19th, a family alerted the media to the case. The Billings Gazette told them that they called the sheriff's office daily for any crime updates and hadn't been made aware of the case. That same day, Yolanda, along with Kisara's father, Alan, went to meet up with Captain Mike Fuss of the Bighorn Sheriff County's office. When they asked why Fuss had not made contact with the family or returned their calls, he told them he had been preoccupied with other cases. When they asked why the crime scene had not been sealed off, he explained that if investigators arrived on the scene before uniformed officers, then they did not need to seal off the scene. According to Fuss, the scene was only sealed off if officers arrived first. Then Yolanda and Alan asked why law enforcement had not charged and turned on Quezra's phone. Fuss was reportedly surprised that the family knew about this, and he said that the battery was dead, and so they didn't attempt to use it. Kisara's family countered this by noting that they could have charged the phone and looked at her recent communications. But Fuss said they couldn't get into that phone and that not even the FBI could. Furthermore, Fuss implied that Kisara had died from alcohol poisoning where she was found and seemed angry when the family told him they were offering a $5,000 reward for any information. He also revealed that the original investigator on the case, Jeremy Middlestat, had stepped down because he, quote, couldn't handle it. Notably, Casella's family were not interviewed by law enforcement until this time. They also spoke with the Bighorn County attorney, Jay Harris, who told the family that the coroner, Terry Bullis, had a conflict of interest in his position as a funeral home business and the counseling medical examiner. Harris also noted that Bullis tended to quickly determine the cause of death as exposure to alcohol and natural causes under his charge as coroner. However, Harris was otherwise reportedly brusque and rude towards the family and failed to provide them with clear answers to any of their questions. At one point telling them, "How do you know that nothing is being done?" On 23rd, the family were notified that no missing persons report had been filed for Kisara and that her name was not in the missing persons database. A week later, the FBI declined to take the case on, stating they needed more evidence that Kisara was murdered on the reservation. Interestingly, just days before Kisara Vashti, she had filmed a video of several police officers beating her 15-year-old wheelchair-bound brother and uploaded it to social media. The incident involved several deputies from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, leading to several officers being reprimanded. It is believed one of the officers who responded to the scene where Kisara's body was found was one of those involved in the beating. This has sparked much speculation that the police were involved in her death or opted not to investigate in retaliation for Kisara attempting to hold them responsible for their actions. In August of 2021, 2 years after the teenager's death, a fresh report revealed that 4 witnesses had been discovered. The statements of these individuals are not fully consistent, but generally describe a series of events which led to an argument outside of a home on Rangeview Drive at around 3 a.m. on August 26, 2019 involving Kisara and 3 other unarmed individuals, including a 17-year-old girl, 19-year-old woman, and 23-year-old man. Some reports mentioned that Kisara had been hanging out at the house and that an occupant had purchased alcohol for her. Reportedly, her blood alcohol level at the time of her demise was not 0.149. The argument that had occurred that night led to another nearby homeowner setting off his Carla, hoping it would cause the group to flee. They did, scattering in different directions. Hizara was last seen heading towards the area where her body was later found. The new report also mentioned that no foreign DNA was discovered underneath her fingernails, and that she was diagnosed with asthma shortly before her disappearance. Kesri's case is still unsolved. If you have any information about her disappearance and subsequent death, then you can contact the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office at 406-665-97. The teenage years are the most challenging of all the stages of growing up. Not a child anymore, but not yet an adult, this time can be characterized. The body undergoes a massive hormonal overhaul, further complicating this transitional period. Yesterday's obedient child becomes unstable and prone to rebellion. A teenager's worldview is a picture of contrasts consisting of black and white tones. The prevailing color in the teen's judgments and actions largely depends on their environment. The story we're about to discuss occurred in Medicine Hat in the southeast of Alberta, Canada. Incomprehensible cruelty and betrayal befell the Richardson family. Their tragedy gained national attention, and once again the Gothic subculture came under fire. In town, the Richardson family was considered exemplary. Deborah and Mark, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, lived in a beautiful and cozy place. Like all Canadians, they were very hospitable and sociable. Their home was often filled with guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. Everything was going well until the eldest daughter entered puberty. The once calm girl changed beyond recognition. First and foremost, Jasmine's character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to occur, and her academic performance dropped. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing transformed. Whereas she previously enjoyed modern pop, she now took an interest in heavy rock. Bright colors and clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative. Jasmine wanted to appeal to boys, so she began to emphasize her rounded shapes. Her interaction with former friends noticeably decreased. She began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed. With the introduction of the internet at home, she became interested in Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even identified herself as a witch preaching the Wiccan religion. For this purpose, she visited various websites of similar nature, where she found a circle of friends who shared her interests. "Welcome to my tragic world, was the greeting on her social media page. It seemed like a typical adolescence, spiced with excessive dramatism and mysticism. However, the girl became more and more detached from her family. In her profile, she listed a fictitious name and age of 15. She liked older interlocutors, wanting to match them. Her parents tried to support their daughter during this difficult period, suggesting spending time together. They looked for common ground activities. However, she found this uninteresting. Jasmine considered her younger brother to be an annoying nuisance. Thus, she spoke to him less and less. Yet, she could spend hours on end at the computer talking to strangers. Deborah and Mark understood that this state was temporary. She would grow up, become wiser. Therefore, they were quite tolerant of her new hobbies. One day, Jasmine told them she would like to go to a concert of a punk rock band. Her parents agreed. If only they knew what this outing would lead to. Early 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a concert of a local youth band pursuing her own interests. Knowing he would be there, Jeremy Steinke, the boy who had been stirring her heart for months. He too was fascinated by Gothic culture. They met on a vampire enthusiast's website where they occasionally communicated. Jeremy portrayed himself as a 300-year-old werewolf thirsting for blood. To prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was of human or animal origin. Nonetheless, the boy clearly considered himself special, which Jasmine found very appealing. Meeting at the concert, the young people grew even fonder of each other. Eventually, Steinke asked her out and she joyfully accepted. All would be fine except Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple knew her parents would disapprove of their relationship, so they kept it a secret. Moreover, his troubled past would hardly endear him to them. The young man was poor and lived in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained due to her excessive drinking. Jeremy had endured her constant stream of volatile partners who often beat him in their drunken rages. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life. Promising that it was all in the past, she got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. Rats again, she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife, and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left the tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" Because your daughter wished it, the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together, she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steineck found it enticing, but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to damn their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window, but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be two silhouettes in a pool of blood. The boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied, but there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the body suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine, and where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe, or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her, or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon, detectives turned to the media requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses, and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinke, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinke, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened after I found out. I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator since breaking the suspects proved difficult. The investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. "I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them," Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. "I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they've done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment." Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. "I think it's the best love story of all time," Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine let him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Stank was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when, asked by the prosecution why he committed the act, he replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Apparently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name, her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance, while others believed she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Miss Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. Brian Worley, a 39-year-old Atlanta, Georgia resident, shared a home with his partner of 13 years, Jeff Ralston. In addition to their city life, Brian and Jeff owned a farm 2 hours north of Atlanta, where they had built a barn together. Brian was one of 10 children and had a close bond with his siblings. A devoted uncle, he cherished his many nieces and nephews. On September 21, 2009, Brian traveled to his parents' home in Carrollton, Georgia, intending to spend a few days with his family before assisting his mother with financial matters at an appointment scheduled for September 24th. Normally a 1-hour drive, the trip took nearly 5 hours due to significant flooding in the area, leaving Brian frustrated with the delay. While visiting, he spent time studying maps to find alternate routes for his return trip home. During his visit, Brian spent September 23rd doing yard work for his mother, stopping later to grab a meal at Taco Bell. Around 3 p.m., he spoke with one of his nieces on the phone. That evening, he stayed at the home of one of his sisters, enjoying time with his family before continuing with his plans. He spoke to Jeff on the phone around 9:30 p.m. while he was still there. Brian then returned to his parents' home where he was staying and called Jeff one more time to discuss an upcoming trip they were taking to visit another one of Brian's sisters in Florida. The following morning, Brian failed to show up for the appointment at the Carroll County Probate Court that he had come to town to attend. Records showed that Brian paid a Carrollton water bill at 3:17 that afternoon, but his family does not believe that this happened on the date and time in the city's records. While the water company maintains that this record is correct, when shown a picture of Brian, none of the people working there who would have accepted the payment recognized him. Brian's car, a blue 1992 Buick LeSabre, was missing from his parents' home, but his cell phone, money, medication, and clothing were all left there. According to Brian's family, he was in good health overall. However, Brian did have a pacemaker, which meant that a medical emergency could not immediately be eliminated as the reason behind his disappearance. Brian's family tried to report him missing to the Carrollton Police Department on Friday, September 25th, but police would not take the report, believing that Brian had gone somewhere on his own accord, purposely leaving his cell phone behind. They finally took the report the next day, and on Monday, September 28th, investigator Tony Johnson was assigned to Brian's case. When police checked Brian's cell phone and computer, they found nothing that aided in their investigation. In addition to the police investigation, Brian's family also mobilized to help look for him, creating a Facebook event and posting flyers to help spread the word about Brian's disappearance and ask for information. One of Brian's parents' neighbors came forward saying that they had seen Brian working in his parents' carport at 2 in the morning on Thursday 24th. This made the neighbor the last known person to see Brian. Brian suffered from insomnia and kept an unusual sleep schedule, so his being awake at 2 a.m. was not cause for concern. The neighbor also reported that when they left for work 6.5 hours after seeing Brian in the carport, his car was gone. For the first few weeks following Brian's disappearance, the theories that Brian had a medical emergency while driving or had driven off a remote road while researching alternate routes back to Atlanta were still on the table. However, several weeks after Brian was last seen, new information indicated that someone else had been involved in his disappearance. On December 2nd, Brian's car was found parked near the intersection of Judson Lane and North Chamberlain Avenue in Chattanooga, Tennessee. His Georgia license plate had been replaced with a stolen Tennessee plate. The keys to the car were in its ignition. Inside the car were the book Brian had been reading at the time of his disappearance and the receipt from his visit to Taco Bell on September 23rd. The container of change Brian kept in the car was still in the car's console. Police were able to determine that Brian's car had been parked there for approximately a month. An individual who worked on cars lived nearby, so neighbors were accustomed to seeing different cars parked in that area for extended periods of time. After the car was connected to the missing persons case, a witness came forward saying that they had seen a tall, thin African-American man walking away from the car after parking it in the spot where it had been found. Forensic examination of the vehicle did not produce any new leads. Brian's case has had little movement since the discovery of his car despite the best efforts of police and Brian's family. There has been no activity on any of Brian's financial accounts since his disappearance. Due to the fact that Brian's car was apparently abandoned by someone other than himself, authorities suspect foul play in the case. In December of 2008, Clinton Cryer realized that he had not heard from his older sister, 44-year-old Tavita Hobbs, in several months. Growing up, the siblings had been very close, with Tavita always looking out for her younger brother. When Tavita enlisted in the Navy in 1982 and began having to regularly move around the country, it limited the amount of time she could spend with her family. But she still spoke with them on the phone as frequently as she could. In 1992, Tavita had married Philip Hobbs. The couple lived in Virginia and California before moving to Raleigh, North Carolina in 2004. By this time, Tavita had left the Navy. When she arrived in North Carolina, she got a job with Salesforce and began going to school to become a court reporter. In 2007, Tavita and Clinton grew even less close following an argument at a family gathering. According to Clinton, it was a stupid disagreement that brought up past issues. After this argument, the regular phone calls between Tavita and Clinton stopped. They still did speak on the phone periodically though, so Clinton was concerned when several months passed without a word from his sister at the end of 2008. Clinton was eventually able to make contact with his brother-in-law Philip over the phone. Philip told Clinton that during the week of Thanksgiving, Tavita had discovered that he was cheating on her and abruptly decided to move back to Burbank, California. She had taken just 2 suitcases with her and left behind her car, which, according to Clinton, was her prized possession. He believes that she would not have left without it. While he found Philip's story suspicious, Clinton stayed in contact with him throughout the beginning of 2009, hoping he would be able to provide him with new information about Tavita's whereabouts. He never did. Philip Hobbs never filed a missing persons report for his wife, so Clinton eventually reported her missing to the Wake County Sheriff's Office in October of 2009. The case was transferred to the Raleigh Police Department in February of 2010. Cell phone records showed that Philip Hobbs never called his wife's cell phone, trying to get in contact with her after the date he claims she left their home. The last communication from Tavita's cell had been on November 24, 2008, when she sent a text to her boss, abruptly quitting. According to Tavita's boss, Tavita had seemed very happy in her position, and there have been no indications that she had been planning to leave the company, especially without giving advance notice. Tavita had also never picked up her last paycheck. If she did leave North Carolina for California, she had done so with very little money. The investigation into Tavita's disappearance was hindered by the amount of time that had passed since she had last been seen, but authorities did their best to perform a thorough investigation. They canvassed her neighborhood Tavita had, but due in part to the many times Tavita had to relocate during her adult life, she had few close friends. Police had a difficult time finding people who could provide insight into Tavita's personal life. They also searched the home Tavita and Philip had shared and used ground-penetrating radar to search the property surrounding it. They found nothing. In March of 2019, a search warrant affidavit from the previous month was unsealed. It revealed that in January of 2019, Raleigh Police Detective Eric Gibney had interviewed an individual only identified as a biological relative of Philip Hobbs. The relative claimed that after Jovita went missing, Philip had buried a firearm behind a house in South Raleigh that belonged to another one of his family members. Police did not search that property immediately, instead installing surveillance cameras in the woods near that home to see if anyone came back to retrieve the firearm. After a month with no activity on the cameras, they searched the area but did not find the firearm or any other evidence. Foul play is suspected in Tavita's case. In May of 2018, Detective Gibney told ABC 11 that something terrible happened to Tavita Hobbs here in Raleigh, and she took her last breath on November 24, 2008. Despite the amount of time that has passed since his sister went missing, Clinton Cryer is still in regular contact with the police in Raleigh, hoping to get resolution in Tavita's case and answers for himself and his mother. Dwayne Lavely lived with his family in Skonion First Nation in Manitoba. The 21-year-old was outgoing and good-natured. He enjoyed spending time outdoors and with his nephews. Dwayne saw his mother, Kelly, on September 18, 2018 and told her that he would be going out of town for a few days with a friend. Kelly was in contact with Dwayne on September 21st via text, but that will be the last time she ever heard from him. On September 26th, Dwayne's vehicle was discovered abandoned on a dead-end street north of St. Rose du Lac, Manitoba, roughly 70 miles away from his home. The car was not damaged and its doors were locked. There was no sign of a struggle or of Dwayne. The discovery of the car triggered a massive search for Dwayne. Investigation by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would reveal that the last sighting of Dwayne was on September 22nd at around 2 p.m. Dwayne was seen putting gas in his vehicle at a gas station in the Ebb and Flow First Nation, 25 miles east of where the vehicle would eventually be found. The air and ground search was initially focused on the outskirts of Ebb and Flow. In addition to the resources from the RCMP, the effort received an enormous amount of support from the community, both in Sconan and in Ebb and Flow. Dwayne's family, immediate and extended, has been a major part of the search effort. The Bear Clan Patrol, a community-based safety organization for the Aboriginal community, was also involved in the ground search. Helicopters scanned the area from the air and individuals on foot and on horseback looked for Dwayne on the ground. The areas being searched were difficult to cover due to high grasses and dense vegetation. As the search continued, the conditions the volunteers faced became even worse. By October, snow was falling in the search area. The weather complicated efforts to find Dwayne, but between 50-70 per day were still coming out for searches. In the spring of 2019, volunteers were still out searching for any sign of Dwayne, even in the cold and rain. In May of 2019, the RCMP conducted another air and ground search of their own near where Dwayne's vehicle was found. By that time, they had also interviewed more than 80 people as a part of their investigation. By the fall of 2019, that number had risen to over 100. In addition to conducting physical searches, Dwayne's family has also held marches and started a Facebook group to spread information for volunteers and ask for information from the public. As the first anniversary of Dwayne's disappearance approached, there appeared to be progress in the case. In early September, the RCMP began to re-interview witnesses. The family's Facebook page generated some new tips that were turned over to the RCMP. There are rumors that the RCMP has a new piece of evidence in the case, but they cannot comment on this rumored evidence due to the ongoing nature of the investigation. While there has not been a major break in the case, having the RCMP focused on Dwayne's case gives his family reason to feel optimistic that they will finally get some answers. Dwayne's parents continue to travel every weekend to search for their son. They also organized a large search for Dwayne on the anniversary of his disappearance. While they have had a lot of support from the community in the form of volunteers, monetary donations, and donated supplies, they have exhausted their own financial resources, just trying to pay for the gas needed to travel to search for Dwayne because Dwayne would not have walked away and cut off all communication. His family believes that he is no longer alive. They are imploring anyone with information to come forward so that they can find Dwayne and give him a proper burial. In 1994, 30-year-old Tamara Bradley was employed by Federal Foam Technologies in Minneapolis, Minnesota. However, the company was preparing to move to Wisconsin. Tamara believed that commuting there from her home in Blaine, Minnesota would not be practical. Since she wanted to stay with the company, she was looking for a new home closer to the company's new headquarters. Tamara planned to spend the first weekend in October looking at such houses. On the night of Thursday, September 29th, she dropped off her 5-year-old son to spend some time with his grandfather, Tamara's former father-in-law. She then had dinner with a friend. Tamara went to work on September 30th. A coworker saw Tamara as she was leaving for the day around 3:30 p.m. According to the coworker, Tamara was driving north on Washington Avenue, which was the way she normally went to get home. This coworker be the last person to see her. When Tamara's former father-in-law arrived to drop off her son on October 2nd, she was not home to meet them as planned. Tamara's son is the main reason why her family does not believe she would have willingly disappeared. While she was a dedicated employee and loved her large family, She was one of 6 siblings. Nothing in her life was as important as her son, and she could not have left without him voluntarily. A major piece of evidence that was not immediately tied to Tamara's case was found on Monday, October 3rd, the day after Tamara was first noticed to be missing. Her car, a 1988 Buick Century Custom, was found parked in a rush hour, no parking zone at the front of the Greyhound bus terminal on Hawthorne Avenue in Minneapolis. The car was not immediately connected with Tamara's disappearance and was towed to an impound lot. Because the car had never been issued a parking ticket, police do not believe that it had been there for very long before it was towed away. When police finally learned that Tamara's car was at the impound lot, they went to search it. Inside, they found the keys to the car as well as several of Tamara's uncashed paychecks and a child support check. Tamara's family does not believe that she could have driven the car to the Greyhound station because of the position the driver's seat was in when the car was found. Tamara was only 5 foot 4 inches tall, and the seat had been positioned all the way back as though someone very tall had last driven it. Someone may have left the car near the Greyhound station so that authorities would assume Tamara had gotten on a bus. However, they failed to get rid of the checks in the car that Tamara most likely would have cashed had she actually decided to leave town and start a new life. There has been no new activity on any of Tamara's financial accounts since she went missing. Following Tamara's disappearance, her youngest sister, Wendy, was awarded custody of Tamara's son. Today, Tamara's mother is in poor health and the rest of the family is hoping for closure in Tamara's case while she is still alive. On November 10, 2016, 54-year-old Paul Brazo attended his son's wedding in Spokane, Washington. His date for the evening was his mother Donna. According to the other guests at the wedding, Paul was in good spirits all night. After the wedding, Paul returned to his home in Springdale, Washington in Stevens County. Paul shared the home with his mother so that he could help take care of her. Tired from the wedding, Donna began to get ready to go to sleep after arriving home. Paul, on the other hand, was not ready to turn in for the night. He told his mother that someone was picking him up and that he would be home the following day. Donna did not ask her son where he was going or who was picking him up. Donna was concerned when Paul did not arrive home when he told her he would, but did not call the police until he had been gone for 48 hours, and there was no doubt that something was wrong. Paul's family does not believe that he would willingly disappear. He was very close with his family and loved his mother, who depended on his help dearly. He was also in the process of planning his grandmother's 101st birthday party, which was scheduled for 2 weeks after he went missing. According to his family, Paul would not have willingly missed the event. He had also planned her 100th birthday party the year before and had very much enjoyed seeing her reaction to all the arrangements he had made to celebrate her. Paul was more than just a loving family man, however. He did have a checkered past and a criminal record. His family fears that he angered the wrong person from his time being involved with drugs. Paul's past has given rise to many rumors about the terrible things that could have happened to him. One of these rumors claims that Paul was killed and dumped on a mountain in a rural part of Stevens County. However, that mountain is large and home to numerous caves and abandoned mine shafts. Unless someone calls it a more specific tip and narrows down the search area, authorities can do little with this potential information. While they are not optimistic that Paul is still alive, his family believes that his case is solvable. They continue to hope for answers in Paul's case. On May 2, 2009, the small town of Wausau, Wisconsin, was shaken by a horrific crime. Brianna Marie Schneller, an 18-year-old girl, became the victim of an act marked by unfathomable cruelty. The tragedy deeply impacted the community, but what made it even more shocking was the motive behind the crime. Brianna was known for her vibrant personality and zest for life. She loved Mexican cuisine, music, dancing, and roller coasters. Academically, she was diligent and excelled as the top student at Everest High School in Washington, according to her parents, Craig and Lori Schneller. That summer, she had planned a trip to Tennessee to compete in a prestigious national competition held by a nonprofit organization for students in professional and technical fields, where she would present her project. She was the only student from Wisconsin to qualify for this honor. Brianna dreamed of a future in restaurant management and aspired to start her own business in the food service industry. To prepare for this, she worked part-time at El Mezcal, a restaurant in Rib Mountain, where she earned praise from friends, colleagues, and patrons alike for her kindness and dedication. Her life was filled with promise, and major milestones were just around the corner. She was weeks away from graduating high school and marrying her 22-year-old fiancé, Sebastian Ramirez. Although her parents initially opposed their relationship due to the age difference, they had come to support her choices and happiness. Brianna's tragic death not only cut short a life brimming with potential, but also left the community grappling with the senselessness of the act. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one workday was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2nd, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girls sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m. he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, the floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face, showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded, but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20 amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schnellers' life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, the Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded. This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events. The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 10-15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leaving him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers' statements were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Rihanna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi and one of them reporting the missing phone against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had an alibi. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager, Raul Ponsaroca, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, he left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he'd gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes. But there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect, Raul Ponsaroca. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos along with a brown hoodie, and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. When it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found, Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raul Pons Rocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Pons Rocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raul arrived at work at 9 a.m. En route to the restaurant, he passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been open. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, he seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Craig Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, His brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raoul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police. And even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm. Joe Halpern was an exceptionally intelligent and multi-talented individual. At just 22 years old in 1933, he was nearing the completion of his doctorate in astronomy at the University of Chicago and had spent the summer conducting research at the university's Yerkes Observatory in Williams Bay, Wisconsin. While Joe excelled in math and science, his intellectual pursuits extended beyond his field. He was fluent in French and German and proficient in reading and writing with the Cyrillic alphabet. Despite his academic achievements, Joe was far from overly serious. He had a playful side, often using his wit and sense of humor to entertain and pull pranks on his friends. He also had a love for the outdoors, which led him to embark on a road trip that August with his parents and his friend, Sam Jarrick. Sam was the brother of Joe's best friend, Isidore Garrick, who had originally been invited on the trip but was unable to join. Joe's brother Bernard also couldn't make it, so the group of four set out from Chicago without them. Their journey took them west to South Dakota and then south to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. During their visit, they stayed at the Glacier Basin Campground. On August 15, 1933, Joe and Sam left the campground to go on a hike, leaving Joe's parents behind to relax and enjoy the scenic surroundings. They drove from the campground in the family's Ford sedan and parked at the Bear Lake trailhead. From there, they hiked towards Flat Top Mountain, which was a very popular route. While Joe enjoyed hiking, his friend Sam was not as interested in it. By 2 p.m., after they had summit Flat Top Mountain, Sam was ready to turn back for the day and return to the campground. Joe was not. The two got into a friendly argument about whether or not to continue on as they stopped just northwest of the summit of Hallett on the trail. This was confirmed by another guest staying at the campground, who ran into the pair while they were debating what to do. Ultimately, Joe and Sam decided to each go their own way. Sam hiked back down the trail and promised to wait for Joe back at the car. Joe continued hiking because he wanted to reach Taylor Peak. Sam would be the last person to definitively see Joe. Sam arrived back at the Bear Lake trailhead at approximately 6:30 p.m. and began waiting for Joe. He knew he would be standing around waiting for his friend for a while, but by 9 p.m., he felt that his wait had been far too long. By 9:30, he contacted a ranger. By 10 o'clock, the official search for Joe began. Due to the darkness that had fallen by the time the search was mobilized, the efforts on that first night were limited to rangers with electric lamps searching the immediate area around where Joe had last been seen. The following day, the search effort expanded greatly. More than 150 volunteers would help look for Joe in the following few days. Park rangers tried to bring in bloodhounds, but there were none available in the area. Rangers checked the registers on Taylor Peak and at other nearby peaks in the park, but Joe had not signed any of them. Sam Garrick and Joe's father, Solomon, performed their own searches as well. During these searches, the pair covered an average of 15 miles per day. No sign of Joe or any of his belongings were found during the extensive searches. The official search for Joe was finally called off on August 21st. The Halperns and Sam Garrick left the park to return to Chicago that same day. While Joe loved hiking, he was not a particularly skilled hiker. Furthermore, he did not have a lot of supplies with him when he left the campground on August 15th. It is believed that he only had a few sandwiches, an orange and some bananas in his gray knapsack. He had been wearing heavy boots on his hike with Sam, but the rest of his clothing was lightweight, a blue shirt and khaki pants. The only equipment he had, so to speak, was a 1933 motorist's map of the park. In the days after Joe went missing, the weather in the park was pleasant during the day, but temperatures dropped into the 40s overnight, and several nights were plagued by windstorms and rain. Even if Joe remained alive in the park after his first night, he would have been cold, wet, and hungry, which would have severely reduced the chances that he remained alive as the days passed on. The superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park, Edmund Rogers, indicated in his monthly report for August of 1933 that he believed that Joe had ended up trying to descend from Taylor Peak too late in the day, after it had gotten dark. In the darkness, he tripped and fell, and he and his belongings ended up stuck in a crevice where the search teams could not find them. This is, of course, the most simple and logical answer to this mystery. Joe's nephew, Roland Halborn, has put forth an alternate but related theory. He thinks that it is possible that his mischievous uncle, who was known to play tricks on his friends, tried to play a prank on Sam Jarek. Sam was expecting to wait for Joe back at the trailhead because he was going back there directly, while Joe was hiking up Taylor Peak. Joe may have decided to try to beat Sam back to the trailhead to startle him. He could have done this if he came back down via the Tyndall Glacier. In his haste to carry out the joke, he could have fallen off a cliff or into the glacier itself. Joe's parents, however, did not give up hope that he had somehow made it out of the park alive. They feared that their son may have hit his head and developed amnesia and was wandering around unsure of who he was or how to contact them. The Halborns, who had worked with the park service while searching for Joe immediately after his disappearance, also reported him missing to the police after they arrived home, in case Joe had made it out of the park and out of the park service's jurisdiction. Solomon Halpern wrote to the superintendent of the park, telling him that he and his wife had taken this action in case Joe had wandered away due to some injury having affected his reason or memory or for some other reason. The Halperns realized that there may have been some other reason for Joe to disappear when they reached out to Joe's best friend, Isidore Garrick. Isidore provided them with letters Joe had written to him, and those letters hinted at the possibility that Joe was not as satisfied with his life and career path as he had appeared. Joe was apparently struggling under the burden of his own intelligence and was becoming disillusioned with the transient lifestyle of sailors and outdoorsmen. While Isidore was positive that Joe would not have hurt his loved ones by leaving without warning, Joe's parents were just happy to have one more reason to believe that their son was still alive somewhere. Their hopes were further bolstered in 1934 when a family acquaintance came to visit their house. The acquaintance had never met Joe and did not know about his disappearance. But when he saw a picture of Joe on display in the home, he told the Halborns that he had seen the man in the picture begging for food outside of a restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona in the winter of 1933. The Halborns immediately reached out to the owner of the restaurant, who agreed to help them. They sent him a picture of Joe, and he took it to the Phoenix police. They, in turn, took the picture to an area transient camp, and some of the boys living there claimed that Joe had been staying there 3 months earlier, although using a different name. In 1936, a family friend of the Halborns named Sam Greenfield wrote to the FBI stating that he believed Joe had been working for the Lewis Brothers Circus in 1935 and using the name Louis Hollenbach. A man with that name was eventually identified, but his age precluded him from being Joe. Neither of these sightings were ever substantiated, but kept hope alive for the Halborns. For years, they continued right to the FBI, as well as to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, asking for help in finding Joe. Joe's fingerprints were available because he had provided them when he opened a postal account. The FBI agreed to put these prints in a missing persons file, but since there was no evidence that a federal law had been broken in relation to Joe's disappearance, there was little else they had the authority to do. Joe's parents petitioned the courts to have their son legally presumed dead in 1950. But as their continuing search for him shows, they do not appear to have ever really given up hope that they would one day find and be reunited with their younger son. Over the years, they kept in contact with Joe's best friend Isidore through the mail. They eventually moved away from Chicago and onto a farm in Indiana. In addition to the main house, the Halperns also had 2 small guest cabins on their property. One was for their older son Bernard and his family to stay in when they came to visit, and the Halperns hoped that the other cabin would one day serve the same purpose for Joe. Sam Jarek eventually became a physician, had children, and then passed away in 1976. Isidore Garrick, Joe's best friend, passed away in 1981. He had a daughter, Linda, who would one day be the person who provided Roland Halpern with Isidore's copies of letters he had sent out after Joe's disappearance. In these letters, Isidore asserts to Joe's parents and to the Park Service that Joe would not have intentionally disappeared. Isidore kept this correspondence and other documents related to his friend's disappearance with his personal papers until his death. Joe's older brother Bernard would have a son, Roland Halpern, almost 20 years after Joe vanished. Roland has described his father as being very stoic, an attitude he attributes to his father's life during the Great Depression. Bernard almost never discussed his missing brother, and the only reason Roland even knew about Joe growing up was because Bernard would warn him against going hiking alone, lest he go missing like his Uncle Joe. After Bernard's death in 1998, however, Roland discovered that his father had continued to work to find out what had become of his brother for decades after he disappeared. Amongst his father's papers and tucked into books, Roland found photographs and letters that Bernard's passionate search for Joe and the frustration he felt at the lack of answers. Bernard had continued writing letters to various government agencies, from the Park Service to the FBI, and following up on leads. Bernard had started his efforts, hoping that he could solve the mystery of Joseph's appearance for their parents. But he continued his quest to find his brother, even after both his mother and father had passed away. Roland has now inherited the task of learning what happened to his Uncle Joe. The largest task he has undertaken involves collecting, cataloging, and digitizing all of the numerous letters involved in the case. He has the letters sent between Joe and Isidore Garrick, letters between his grandparents and Isidore, letters his grandparents sent to different government agencies, and letters his own father sent off on behalf of Joe. He has used these letters to find clues to help follow up on the reported sightings of Joe, inform his own opinions on the case, and learn what he can about the uncle he never had a chance to meet. He also does research into unidentified remains and has been in contact with various law enforcement agencies about using DNA to potentially identify those belonging to Joe. Roland hopes to find answers in the case on behalf of his father and grandparents and all of the decades they spent working to find Joe. Given the fact that Joe Halpern would now be well over 100 years old, it seems unlikely that he is still alive. However, Roland Halpern still hopes to answer the question of what happened to his uncle and to locate him. While it may seem that the only benefit of locating Joe's remains would be the peace it would bring to Roland and his family, it would also have more practical and tangible benefits. Joe's parents are both buried in Florida. Roland has purchased a burial plot near where they are laid to rest in hopes of one day burying the remains of the son they spent so many years searching for close to them. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.